Positions have been a staple in other MOBAs for years, but the average Deadlock player doesn't even know what they are or how they actually help you win a ton of games. What's up friends, this is Metro and today we're going to go over positions in Deadlock. And if we're talking about positions, we're talking about which hero on the roster on your team requires the most farm, which hero on the roster requires the least farm, and how do you use this information to make you and your team win more games. The main difference to other MOBAs, and let's say Dota for example, is in Dota, on a lane, only the person that last hits the creeps gets the souls, right? So in Dota you can make the conscious choice, even at the start of the game, to decide who is going to get the money, who's going to get least, or who's going to get less money, and who's going to benefit the most from the money. And in Dota, we have a thing where there's usually a position 1, which is like the hard carry on the lane, supported by 1 or 2 supports, that wants to basically spend most of the game farming, pushing lanes and getting ahead that way. Then we have a position 2, a solo laner that gets some money at the start of the game and then roams around and helps the team win the mid game. And then we have position 3, 4 and 5, right? So in Deadlock, obviously not really applicable. In Deadlock we have 6 players, and in Deadlock up until 8 minutes in the lane, every person that is around when you last hit creeps, when you last hit souls, gets the same amount of money. There are heroes in Deadlock that require a lot more money, can do a lot more with souls, I should say. And there are heroes that really don't benefit a lot from having a lot of money. And how can this help you win games? It really depends on what you're playing. Let's go for a very easy example. Kelvin is a character that is very support focused, right? Doesn't really require a lot of money to come online. He's very powerful early game with healing. And even if Kelvin falls a bit behind in souls in the mid game, his impact still comes from the fact that he can drop an Ice Dome, have insane healing, right? And provide utility to the team that way, right? Slowing beam, etc. Kelvin is usually, unless you play Gun Kelvin, Kelvin is not usually the pick that is gonna deal the most damage to the enemy team, right? Usually the Kelvin has the most healing, or some of the most healing, and really doesn't deal a lot of damage to the enemy team. Now we can compare that to someone like Yamato. Very strong in lane, don't get me wrong, but after laning, Yamato usually requires a lot of farm to get online, right? Yamato, if you play a Spirit Yamato, the big power spike is usually Refresher, and before that you still need a ton of items to do insane damage. But once Yamato gets to that power spike, once Yamato gets to that scary number of souls, we all know how strong, how oppressive she can be, right? Like she's like the unkillable carry that deals the most damage, tanks the most, right? And then there's hybrid characters in between the two. For example, I would say something like Mirage. Mirage is a character that is very strong, hits very hard, and can benefit from having some money. But Mirage doesn't really need that much money to become online, right? Mirage is arguably still very strong in lane, and even after the laning stage in the mid game, early mid game, he's very powerful without actually AFK farming the jungle. Which brings me to why I'm making this video and why I think this is going to be really helpful for you to learn now. Because I think in the future, once we get closer to Deadlock's full release, I'm taking my socks off by the way, I'm warm as fuck. Once we get to like the closer to the full release of Deadlock, I would imagine we're gonna see a system where you pick heroes depending on your role. This is already a thing right now with frontline characters, right? There was a patch a few weeks / months ago that guaranteed at least 2 frontliners per team, because sometimes you could end up with a team where there was no one that could absorb any damage in the front, and then that team that didn't have the frontliners would just auto lose the game, right? And I think once we get closer to full release, we'll probably see a pick and ban phase for a competitive Deadlock, at least, if we're going into a competitive queue in the future. And people are gonna pick a composition that makes sense. Obviously, there's compositions that make sense and some that don't, right? Like for example, if you have like 4 raw damage dealers, like let's say you have double sniper, Vindicta, Great Talon, and then you also have a Wraith and a Haze, right? That's already, no matter what the last 2 characters are, that's already not a great composition to play, because you're lacking a lot of utility, right? You're lacking a lot of stun potential, and you're lacking a lot of tankiness already. Which, I guess, brings me on why I wanted to make this video at the current moment. The meta shifted quite drastically with the new map, right? There is more jungle to be had, to be farmed for both teams. And laning or staying on the lane after 8 minutes is not nearly as important anymore, right? You only have 3 objectives to defend per lane, or 6 I should say, 3 guardians and 3 walkers. So what ends up happening is there's usually more free time for the average person to do something else on the map. And I see a lot of people in my games or other games on high and low rank just moving to the jungle, right? They don't know what to do. You have 3 people on 3 lanes, they're being pushed, nobody's really attacking your towers. I might as well go jungle, right? And farm the jungle. And then you have, let's say, a pocket at 9 minutes. Let's assume the pocket won the lane, and then they go into their own jungle and farm the saves. And then you look back at 25 minutes and you lost the game. Why is that? It might be that Pocket's fault. And here is why. The reason I brought up Pocket is another example of one of those position 3 to 4 characters, where Pocket really doesn't need that much money to become a hard carry, and more importantly, Pocket is insanely strong early game, right? Like Pocket arguably has this power spike right after laning stage. Let's say you have a good laning stage, you get a few key items, and then you are probably the most powerful person in the lobby, right? You can do a lot of damage and a lot of burst with just your abilities while not really having a lot of farm. What should you have done instead of farming your saves at 7, 8, or sorry, they spawned at 8 minutes. What should you have done instead? You should have probably went to look for team fights, went to look for ganks into the enemy jungle. And who should have gotten the farm instead? Probably you want to give it to one of your position 1 or 2 characters. And we can do this mind game in every single comp you play. Let's just go into a game I played right here. And we're just gonna look at our team composition, and we're gonna determine who actually does need the money here on our team. This is not the easiest choice here. We have 7, Ivy, Infernus, Moon, Krill, Abrams, and Geist, right? Now, if you wanna prioritize these characters based on how much money they need to become online, I would say Infernus and 7 are really close, so I would classify them as 1 and 2 positions, because they definitely need the most money to come online. Both of those characters, depending on how you play them, need quite a lot of money to start becoming useful, and they're probably a bit weaker early mid game. And then I would say position 3 is probably Lady Geist, because Lady Geist still does need some farm to become strong, but you can make it work without her being the most farm character on the team. And then probably Abrams as position 4, because Abrams, he wants to be the tank and he wants some items to become tanky and really powerful, but he doesn't necessarily need so much money to become useful. And then we can look at Moon, Krill, and Ivy as a hard supports in position 5 and 6, and I think those are interchangeable. Both of those characters really don't need a lot to be strong, right? Why is Ivy always strong, even if Ivy doesn't have money? Ivy, the main tools Ivy has is the ultimate, right? You can fly around, save your teammates in team fights. All you really need is, if you're playing support Ivy, a healing Nova, right? You have your passive, your Watcher's Covenant, you have your Stone Form that can protect you and your teammates, and your Katsu Bomb, which doesn't even scale that insanely well. It's a 0.6 scale multiplier. So there's really no reason for you to farm that much money. And I know what you're gonna say. What if I want to play Gun Ivy? What if I wanna, play the carry Ivy? And that's totally cool. Right now you can do what you want. I'm just saying, in this team composition, on Ivy, if you go into your own jungle and you farm all saves, and you're letting your Infernus and your 7 sit in lane and struggle and not get a lot of money, there's a very good chance you lose, right? So I'm not saying starve yourself of money if you're a support player, but you have to come to terms with the fact that if you play this game right now, if you play characters that don't necessarily need a lot of farm, but then you AFK farm, you're kinda throwing the game for your team. That's just how it is right now. And the more we play this game, the better people get, the more this is really the case. Which brings me to another main reason I made this video. Sinner sacrifices right now, depending on when you watch this video, are insanely strong, right? Triple gold statue buff every time you finish them off at the right timing. Insanely big amounts of buffs that go on top of the gold that you get, right? By farming them. And who should you give these gold statues too. And this is not some propaganda for myself. I know I'm playing 7 in this game and I usually play carry characters. But you really want to give these saves, you want to give it to your position 1 and 2 characters. Why? Because these characters are also characters that really benefit from all the stats the gold statue buffs give you, okay? Gold statue buffs give you spirit power, they give you health, they give you cooldown reduction, and then they give you 3 weapon upgrades, which is ammo, weapon damage, and fire rate, right? So, if you're playing a character that does not scale well in gun, it is basically already kind of a waste to go for these gold statue buffs of the Sinner Sacrifices. Now, of course, if you're in the enemy jungle, and there's a Sinner Sacrifice there, and the enemy is about to take it, right? Or you're on the way, of course you take them, right? I'm not saying ignore all jungle farm and ignore all Sinner Sacrifices. But I had a game today where I had a magician that was doing really well in lane. And then after, at 8 minutes, he left the lane, went to our jungle and took all our Sinner Sacrifices. And what ended up happening is we lost really hard. Why was that? Because the person, arguably, that is the strongest early game on our team, or was the strongest early game, magician, right? That doesn't need that much stats, went AFK, got the stats, and made everyone else suffer for it, right? Whereas if the magician went actually around, ganked, right, pushed objectives, and let like our Infernus farm the Sinner Sacrifices, there would have been a way higher chance of us winning, right? There's always split case scenarios where if it's on the way, right? If it's on the way and you're not really wasting a lot of time, of course you go for farm, right? It's always efficient. Like if you're on Ivy and you're rotating from one lane to another and there's a creep camp on your way, you can throw a Katsu bomb, right? And finish the creep camp off. It's free money, of course. Efficiency is really important in this game, right? But what I'm saying is, I really want to introduce the Deadlock community, if you agree, to the concept of like a dedicated hard carry. We're already seeing this in pro games more and more, where one person is really like the dedicated farmer, right? To where the team tries to allocate as much resources as possible to that person, because that person is on a character that gets so much value out of it, right? And who gets the most value from money? Let's go over every single character, and I'll give you my opinion. I would love to hear your opinion in the comments below, but I'll give you my opinion on why I think the person needs so and so much farm and why I think the person is so strong. And yeah, let's start right with Abrams, right? Abrams does need a certain base level of power. If Abrams is very far behind compared to the enemy team in money, he blows up quite easily. But if he's on even or a bit lower money than the enemies, right, he can hold his own. Right now, Spirit Abrams is really popular, right? Spirit builds make it so you really can't die. You can stay in the fray and be like the main tank for your team for a long time. So I would classify on average in a game to be Abrams around a position 3 to 4. So I mean middle of the pack. He doesn't want to be the person that has the lowest money on the team, but he also doesn't want to be the most farm person. There's always going to be cases where on any character in the game you can suddenly have the most or the lowest net worth. Always going to happen, right? But Abrams is not going to be the person that after laning stage they go into jungle and AFK farm for a bit, right? That's not a thing. Abrams, especially in the mid game, right? You want to go around and then go for kills, right? Get some kills and then suddenly push a tower. Get an early flex slot from a walker, right? So Abrams a position 3 and 4. And I would say the same thing goes for Bebop. Bebop does benefit a lot from gun items. Gun Bebop is insanely strong right now. I know people still like Bomb Bebop, Spirit Bebop, but Gun Bebop is just insanely strong. I think this character will get nerfed very soon. But the reason I'm not putting Bebop in a position 1 or 2 is even if he doesn't get a lot of money, and if he's like one of the poorer people on your team, with a hook combo, right, he can still get a free kill, right? If you hook someone into your team, you can kill that person. And even in a 1v1, even if he's behind in money, if you hook someone into him and he has like a slowing hex or a silence glyph, he can one-shot them, right? With a half-decent gun build, right? So Bebop, position 3 to 4. Same goes for Calico. Calico is insanely strong on the new map. Needs a nerf too, for sure. Like the rotations she can do with the cat are really good, right? Like the mobility of her matters even more on the new map because there's less zip lines to go around. So, but like Calico, you don't want to, again, a character you don't want to AFK farm with, right? Calico is strongest, like in lane and in the mid game, and she can scale really well in the late game. I'm not saying she falls off, but she is strongest in the mid game, I would say, where she comes out of lane, you get your Torment Pulse or whatever you do, your Hunter's Aura, right? And then you go and you gank and you roam and you force team fights over and over, right? She's not an AFK farm jungler. If you like getting a lot of money on Calico, best thing you can do, again, is go for team fights and go for kills. Dynamo, I would classify as a support, so position 5 to 6. Very simple explanation. Dynamo will do well with his spells, no matter how much money he has, right? Black Hole always works. You can have 0 net worth or a 3k net worth, and Black Hole is gonna do a lot, right? If you hit multiple people with it. Uppercut or the knock up is gonna do well no matter what, because it's just like the main thing about it is not the damage. Unless you play Impregnator build, right, which is really popular on Dynamo right now. But the main thing is not the damage, it's the fact that you debuff the enemy, right? That you stop their movement, right? It's good for chasing, good for getting out, good for saving your teammates. You know what I'm saying? Same for the healing, right? And obviously, you do need some money on any character, but support, you buy Healing Nova, you're fine, right? You buy some items that give you increased healing, and you're good, right? Great Talon, I would classify as like a position 3. He's more on the carry side. He's not great at jungling, which is one of the reasons I wouldn't classify him as 1 or 2, because he doesn't clear jungle quite as efficiently and fast as possible. That's another thing I forgot to mention. I think that is also a thing that really puts people into position 1 and 2. Because if you compare Great Talent to something like a Wraith, right? Like, I'm gonna clear the creep camps twice as fast. So I'm twice as efficient at getting the money. Great Talon might benefit as much from the money as the Wraith, right? But because he's gonna take twice as long, it's not worth going for it, right? And Great Talon does great, no, you know, he can sit in lane, push out lanes, go for owl ganks, right? Get value that way, or go for snipes. Haze is the first true 1 to 2 position carry, I would say, right? It is debatable if she's truly like a 1 position where she needs the most money, but usually Hazes end up having a lot of money, and there is a good reason for it. She's insanely efficient at farming the jungle, right? She's insanely fast, and she does need a lot of items to get online. A Haze, at least on high level, before you get unstoppable or at least like a 6k damage item, right, is not gonna be super scary, right? And right now, Spirit Haze is the meta. You still need a lot of items to get to where you can press 4 without dying instantly, right? I think the Haze players in the comments can all relate. Like, Haze is very squishy. You need a lot of farm to make the character useful. But once you get the farm, you are really strong. Haze is actually very solid right now, right? So I really want you to look at this thing, as I said already, of like not like... It's like a mixture of who's fast at farming, but also who needs the farm. Which, Holiday, interesting case, also like a 3 to 4 position, right? Gun Holiday obviously not being played right now. People play Spirit Holiday. She's insanely good at setting up fights, right? Like initiating with a grapple, dislocating people into your team, right? And getting chain stuns with like a warp stone combo on your jump pad, etc., etc. But again, you don't need like a massive amount of money to be useful, right? If you are defending your walker, and let's say you have warp stone, you go in, you grapple someone, you warp stone them back, jump at them into your walker, and they're dead, right? Without you needing a lot of farm for it, right? So Holiday, I would classify as position 3 or 4. Infernus, another 1 to 2 position. Infernus requires a lot of money to get online. There is a version of Infernus right now that VP is playing, Virtus Pro, and everyone has kind of started playing, which is like a tanky Infernus, where you go 1 max Catalyst and 2 max early, and you build kind of tanky items like Warpstone, and you nuke people. So you can play Infernus as like a 3/tank position, but I would say overall Infernus, you know, the more money you have on Infernus, the better, right? Like there's always another item you can buy that makes him even stronger. Ivy, clear support character, 5 to 6 position in most cases, right? Like yes, in the late game, Gun Ivy does scale well still, but that's not why most people play Ivy, and that's not why you should play Ivy, even if you enjoy Gun Ivy. You should play Ivy if you wanna make sure your team doesn't die, right? If you want to use Rescue Beam, if you want to use your ult to initiate fights and save people on your team. She's a clear-cut support, right? Like, she has an entire ability that makes her do well in combination with another hero, right? Watch as Covenant. And Airdrop, obviously. Great with another player. And Kelvin is like the hardest support in the game. No character can be as poor as Kelvin in a game and still do amazing. If you are the poorest person in the lobby and you hit a good Ice Dome with, let's say, you and another person, you save that person and you trap an enemy within, right? That enemy is dead. You got all the value by just having a really good Ice Dome, right? And your Arctic Beam is also... In lane, it does good damage, but later on, Arctic Beam is used for the slow, right? You want to slow down the enemy, you want to make them stop, you want to make them stop chasing your team, or you chase them and you slow them down so they can't escape, right? So Kelvin is like the ultimate support 6 position. And if you go into the jungle after laning and you take the saves on Kelvin, you're throwing. And why are you throwing? Again, Kelvin does not really benefit nearly as much as the 1 and 2 position characters from the gun buffs, especially on the Sinner Sacrifices, right? And right now the most efficient farm is Sinner Sacrifices. I'll make a video very soon on macro and how to farm right now, because jungle is just so good in this patch, and I think jungle will be way better in general. Because there is more of it now, because there's less lanes, right? So there's going to be more jungle naturally. There's always going to be a jungler, and there's always going to be gold statue buffs. And the reason you don't really need them on Kelvin is you don't really benefit from the ammo a lot. You don't really benefit from the fire rate and the weapon damage a lot. And while you think you may, someone like a Wraith or a 7 is going to benefit from those stats way more, right? Like the spirit is nice, the cooldown reduction is nice, and the health is nice, you can get from them, but they're way more valuable if you give them to your Yamato. Lady Geist, as I said already, I would classify as like a 3 to 4 position, kind of like Abrams. Probably needs a bit more money than Abrams, so more like a 3 position than a 4 position, which I would classify Abrams as. Yeah, Lady Geist can also easily be run as a 1 and 2, right? She is very fast at farming jungle. The issue with Geist right now in the current meta is she's very slow to get around. So she's very slow to rotate from creep camp to creep camp, even though the creep density is so high right now in Deadlock. So Lady Geist I would classify as a 3. And I think at this point you understood the concept. So now I'm going to speed it up a bit just to get through all of them, and then I'll give you the overall thoughts that I have. Lash, probably like a 4 position or a 3 position. Benefits from money, but again, doesn't need the most money in the game to be useful, right? Like Lash ult. McGinnis, worst character in the game right now, but definitely a support. Probably like a 5 position, because you need some money to make your healing really strong if you want to build turrets, make your turrets strong enough. Mirage, like a strong 3 position. Mirage can scale insanely well with money if he has a lot of it, but Mirage is not great at farming the jungle, and Mirage, even if you are not far ahead, or even in money, you win most 1v1 duels, right? Like he's very scary in how much damage he does, even if you're not super farmed. And yeah, again, not great at farming jungle. Moon Krill, 5 to 6 position, slow at farming, and even if you get a lot of money on Moon Krill, right? If you ask me, would you rather have a 60k Yamato and a 30k Moon Krill, or would you rather have a 60k Moon Krill and a 30k Yamato? The choice is obvious, right? You want to have the Yamato to have more money than the Moon Krill. Paradox, same, 3 to 4 position. Pocket, strong 3 position, but again, you also got to keep in mind when they're the strongest. On Pocket, your peak is in the mid game at like 10 to 20 minutes. That's where you can do the most damage and you can be the most impactful, and then he falls off late game, so don't spend that time farming. 7 needs the most money in the game to be strong, other than Infernus arguably, right? Like 7 needs a lot of time to get online, you need Surge of Power, you need a lot of items to start damaging, and then you want Unstoppable for your ult, and 7 is insanely strong. But the reason 7 is so strong is because he's so insanely fast at clearing creep camps, right? It's probably the fastest farmer in the game right now. If I have a lot of spirit, I have Surge of Power on my 3, I can run from creep camp to creep camp cleared in 1 second, and I have farmed the entire jungle. Suddenly I have 5k money, where every other character in the game would have like needed 3 times as much time to get the same amount of money, right? And 7 also benefits from that money a lot. And on 7 I'm usually in the jungle at 8 minutes, whenever something comes up, especially farming Sinner Sacrifices. Shiv, again, like a 3 to 4. Sinclair, actually a support. And I don't see Sinclair being played a lot, especially on low rank. I think he's very hard to play. He's the best laner in the game. Like, he's a lane bully. He wins any lane if you know what you're doing. But that being said, he doesn't need that much money after. He becomes really strong no matter what at like 10 minutes in the mid game too. After, like laning is his best and then he falls off more and more. He doesn't become useless, but he becomes weaker and weaker as the game goes on, I would say. You want to fight basically when your character is the strongest. And Sinclair is the strongest early in the game, right? So don't go into your jungle at 8 minutes and farm Sinner sacrifices on Sinclair. Don't do it. Vindicta, again, like a 3 or strong 2 position, right? She does need a lot of money to get online, but she's not great at farming jungle compared to other characters. And she, right now, the way most people play Vindicta is Spirit Vindicta, where they go Crow build, and they have a lot of Spirit Shred resist on her. So yeah, she wants to be in the fights, obviously, right? The main mechanic she gets money from is a snipe, and the snipe works on enemy heroes, right? So Viscous as support, 5 to 6 position. Viper, probably a 1 to 2. There is a case to be made for Viper being like a 3 or 4, because Viper can become quite dangerous even with not that much money. You can do like the Spirit Viper combo where you throw Bola and, you know, poison. The poison ticks do insane. Warden, 3 to 4, Wraith, 1 to 2, and Yamato, easily like a 1 character, right? Like I think out of all the characters in the game, 7 and Yamato benefit the most from money. If you have these 2 characters farmed, you gotta do insanely well. Okay, so now that I told you all of this, how do you apply this in your games, right? You're probably solo queuing, maybe with a friend, and you have 4 randoms on your team. You can only really control yourself, right? So what I would first do is, like try to at least first understand what type of character you're playing, right? Don't be like my Eternus teammate on Sinclair and farm the entire jungle while your team is suffering, right? If you want to play Gun Ivy, that's cool. But you have to understand that it's probably, if you have a 7 on your team and you're playing Ivy, it's probably the better choice to give you a 7 farm priority over you, and you focus more on pushing out creep waves, right? Maybe running urns with your flight, etc., right? So the first thing you can do is try to keep in mind, if you load into game, look into, like, you know, the lineup you have, and look at your team compared. This game cancelled early, but look at your team composition and figure out where you stand in your team composition, right? Like here, it's kind of tough. We have like 3 characters that need a lot of money, right? 1, 2, 3. So I would, like in this case, you can, if you're one of the 3, farm as efficiently as possible without letting your objectives die, obviously, right? But if you end up being the Kelvin on this team and suddenly you're going into the jungle, you're actually throwing the game, right? And I'm really not saying this to be selfish, but if you play something like Kelvin, if you like playing the support playstyle, you got to be okay with giving your carries a bit more money, right? And if you're Calico, you want to be the person that perma fights here, right? Because you need to perma fight, because it's gonna take a while until you're 7 and your haze get online, right? Like Wraith can fight pretty early and be kind of dangerous without that much farm, right? But the 7 and the haze are not gonna do anything in the early game. So you have to be, if you're the Calico in this game, you have to try to force fights, try to win, or at least defend objectives, and try to make sure, give your 7 and your haze some time to farm up. Same for you guys, right? One more example. Let's look at this game on Calico that I lost. Wraith, undeniably number 1 position. She needs the most money on the team, or you want to make sure that Wraith gets the, I shouldn't say the most money, I mean the most farm. You want to give Wraith the most jungle possible. You want to make sure that Wraith gets most of the Sinner sacrifices. And again, if you go into the game and you realize, wait, my number 1 position is not farming at all, you can take the jungle as a number 2, right? But maybe encourage your team, hey, you should farm this jungle. And meanwhile, I am Calico and I'm running into the enemy jungle, looking for a gank, trying to go for a kill, and then stealing some of the enemy's Sinner sacrifices, right? So my team doesn't suffer for it, right? So in this game, I would say Wraith number 1, then Warden probably number 2, and then Calico Holiday number 3, and Shiv, and then Viscous is gonna be like the poorest person on average, and funnily enough, they are the poorest person on our team in this game. Because they don't need that much to be useful, right? You have your healing, if you build your rescue beam and your support Viscous, right? There's lots of playstyles for every character, but don't go into a game and then pick like a hard support like Kelvin, and then try to play poor gun Kelvin where you're the one carrying. You're lowering at least the chances of your team to win, right? Unless you just want to have fun and you're dabbling around in emissary. This is really more so a video with tips and tricks to make you win more. Keep in mind what you play. Keep in mind what your teammates play. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that pop up, and I'm sure I missed some things about the video. This was just a short overview, an introduction to positions in Deadlock. Just being mindful of, should I really be the one farming the jungle right now? Or should I be the one pushing objectives? Shouldn't I be the one farming the jungle, right? And who gets the sinner sacrifices, right? Like, who should I give the resources to give myself and my team the highest chance to win? I hope that was somewhat helpful. Yeah, let me know. Any questions in the comments. And until next time, see you friends. Bye-bye.